Hey everybody, welcome to Ology. It's great to see you again, and I'm really excited about this week's episode because this is the one that really started this whole concept off for me. And I would do actually today's episode every week if I could, because today we are studying, and you can't read my writing, and it's probably backwards. Liner notes, liner note-ology, liner notes-ology. Music is kind of unique amongst the art forms. You know, if you are going to see a TV show or a movie, you have to watch it, and a painting has to be looked at, a book has to be read. But music is different. Music it can be listened to, but it can also just be enjoyed in the background, and that's not how I listen to music. I have always loved to really focus on the music, and part of focusing on the music for me has been paying attention to the liner notes. What are liner notes? There's probably some people on here, and I'm looking at everybody. There's Liam. Hi, Liam. Oh my gosh, some wonderful folks on here. There's probably some of you out there, maybe you're on the younger side, or maybe you're just a very casual music fan, but you may not know what liner notes are. So liner notes are basically the information that comes with the record. So here I have a Counting Crows CD, and we got the booklet from back in the 1900s when we had such things. And we got pictures of the band, we got lyrics, but basically the information in here is kind of the who, what, when, where, how of this particular record. And sometimes it's scattered throughout the booklet, but here there's just one page with all the, you can't really see that, can you? But it's got musician credits, it's got production and engineering credits. And it's also got thank yous, a list of people in the business or other artists that the group or the artist wants to thank. And these were like my hymnals. I mean, I would follow along in the liner notes. I would read the lyrics as I was listening. I would pore over those instrumental credits, looking for familiar names. I would even look at the thank yous, and sometimes I would see other artists thanked in the thank yous, and I'd be like, why are they thanking that artist? And there would just be this mystery, and it would open up all these pathways of really thinking about the music for me. And it was just a super integral part of my musical upbringing. Much of this information is available online now, of course, with digital releases. You can find all this information out there on allmusic.com or Wikipedia, or Discogs is another site that has a lot of this stuff. But the difference is, instead of having the music in your hand and having information right there in front of you where you might flip through it, you have to go out and search for it now. And so I think a lot of people may not have, understandably, the time to do that. And so to me, I feel like we're losing a lot when we lose liner notes. Last week we did plants, right? We did my garden, and just like knowing the name of a flower, or knowing some of the ecology of an insect species or something like that, just like that doesn't kill the... I've had people say to me in the past, like, doesn't that take some of the beauty out of it, some of the mystery out of it? And it really doesn't for me. It really, every question just leads to another question or several more. And so for me, knowing a little bit of this information really does help the music kind of come alive. I feel like I should pause here and just check and see who's here. Oh, hi, Grandma Jane. We got some people. I can wave at people. Here we go. I just waved at some folks. So I love liner notes, and a record like this, Counting Crows record, I would look at this and say, like, okay, we got the band, and it's produced by T-Bone Burnett. Now, T-Bone Burnett has produced many, many records that you know and love. He produced that big Wallflowers record. He did the Robert Plant and Alison Krauss Raising Sand record. He's done any number of just huge records. So that's a familiar name right there. I'm also looking down here at additional musicians, and this is where it starts to get interesting. The first name is David Immergluck, who plays guitars, mandolins, and pedal steel, and mandocello. Actually, yeah, mandocello and vocals. David Immergluck, if I were to go to John Hyatt, the Walk On record, I would see in these liner notes, let's see where the credits are. Follow through here. This is basically what I would do as a teenager all the time. Yeah, there it is, David Immergluck right here. He was the guitar player on this record. And sometimes I would see a review and I would be like, I would hear somebody singled out for their contribution, and I'd be like, oh, I remember that name from the Counting Crows record. I might like this John Hyatt record, and I would pick it up, and sure enough, I would. So knowing this kind of information would really help me enjoy stuff. And I could keep going here forever. Bill Dillon on guitar and guitargan. Bill Dillon, let's see, he would be right here on Chris Whitley's Living with the Law record. Plays guitar on this record. I also love this record, and I love the Counting Crows record. There's like a thread that connects them. I think there was one other too. Oh yeah, Denny Fong Heiser. Now, the Counting Crows, of course, had a regular drummer, but Denny Fong Heiser is a studio drummer, and he played the drums on Mr. Jones, their big kind of first hit. And then years later, if I can do alphabetical order, yeah, Richard Sindel. Here we go. See on this one? Oh, that's a siren. There's lots of things. This is a very active house. We live on a street near the hospital, and there's kids playing Xbox above me. So there's going to be a lot of interruptions here. So Denny Fongheiser, I believe, would go on to play on a Richard Sindel record, but I'm having trouble finding it now. Anyway, this is the kind of stuff that I do for fun. I know that makes me weird, but we're all a little weird in our own way, and this is just one of the things that I love to do. And you can kind of see, I have a degree in evolutionary biology, you can kind of see how this process of tracing the threads between musicians is, it's kind of evolutionary in a way. It's kind of thinking about the relationships of things and how one thing leads to another thing. And for me, that's just a really interesting way of looking at the world. I've gotten some questions here. Thank you to Rebellion Dogs or Monday Night Men on Chris Smithers CD. What's that all about? You got me. I don't know. Oh, hi, Robbie. Robbie Hecht is here. All right, let's see. I'm going to try and bring in today's special guest, and maybe he can request to come in himself, or I can find him here. There it is. Boom. We're going to bring... Wait for it. All right.
Here I am.
Mr. Matt Smith. Hey, Matt.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Great.
I want to be able to hear you. Turning you up. Let me just introduce you really quickly for those of you that don't know. Matt Smith, Managing Director of Passim in Harvard Square, fabled music club, home of Dylan and Baez and Tracy Chap. Oh, there you go, right there. Passim logo. Lori McKenna, Josh Ritter, Joni Mitchell, Suzanne Vega, Tracy Chapman, the list goes on. How are you? It's good to see you.
I'm doing well. It's fun hearing you talk about all of these artists because, I was the same kid that went through my records and CDs and looked up everybody who was part of everything. You'd start to recognize like where things were recorded and
yeah.
like all these different aspects. And even, but back then I didn't even think about producers and things like that. You know, it's like it was
Right.
all about the musicians, and then later on you start to see trends in producers, and so it's such an exciting thing to kind of start to build all those connections in your brain.
Absolutely. They're like neural pathways, I think,
Yeah.
like truly. Let me ask you now, I'm in front of part of my CD collection, which I can't seem to get rid of, although the quarantine, it might happen during the quarantine. I might have to like break it down into like a binder situation. But I do have a vinyl collection. It's up above me. I see you're in front of your vinyl collection,
This
like
is
the original liner notes. I need to
one
know,
of my vinyl collection.
yeah, I need to know how many records do you have, Matt Smith?
Let's see.
Do you know?
Some more over there. I have, you know, actually I use Discogs to catalog my stuff, the site that you mentioned earlier. And I think I'm probably around 8,000 or something ridiculous like that. And that's just vinyl.
Yeah.
The CDs are mostly boxed up in the basement, but I do have one rack of them up here that I keep available for jumping in the car. And I keep bags of CDs in the car.
Yeah, vinyl's really, really crappy for jumping in the car
Not good for the car. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. 8,000. So, frankly, you're winning both the quarantine beard competition and the record collection competition, if
Okay.
if it can be said to be such.
I've got the beard cataloged on Discogs too. Every
I love it. Well, you know, one of the things that I love most about liner notes and records in general is, you know, live music is great. It's different every time. It's this kind of ephemeral, kind of transient thing, and we all miss it so much right now. But records, you know, until very recently, I felt like they were kind of getting a little bit of short shrift in that they were thought of as this static document, this thing that's like, you know, captures a moment in time, and it's this unchanging thing. I don't know if you've had this experience, but for me, I take away new things when I go back to a record with older, shall we say, more experienced ears, and in that way, that, you know, I'm changing, but the record changes for me. Do you feel that as well?
Yeah, you know, I think that with a lot of records, you interact with them in a moment in time, and sometimes they build kind of sensory memories that you have,
Yeah,
where you know, like that record brings you back to whenever you first listened to it, and it might not even have been when that record came out. You know, it might have a different um,
right.
you know, a different take, but then later on you can really kind of move beyond the nostalgia of it and start to build a broader context for it, even, you know, in context with other things that came out at that time, or in the arc of a career of, you know, of an artist, and what that phase for them might have been. And so you pull in all these other uh, very dynamic aspects to it that, you know, that bring your own personal history and memory into it, as well as the context of music at large.
Absolutely. It's like the union of all those things
Yeah.
together kind of makes the whole thing like a living, breathing kind of organism in a way that you can follow over time. Um, and you know, the same thing holds true for the liner notes. For me, one of the biggest thrills of my musical of my job is to be able to cross paths with someone that I've only known
Yeah,
from a liner note, you know.
absolutely.
And you know, I'm kind of a shy person. You know, I don't like to kind of go up to people out of the blue, but I have found liner notes to be like an amazing opening line in terms of starting a conversation with someone that I wouldn't otherwise feel comfortable with. And
Absolutely.
yeah, you know, so like recently
Especially if
I
you,
was,
oh, go
so go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh, I
No,
mean,
you,
like, especially if you kind of, you know, nerd out on this stuff like us, and you might know that very not well known thing that they
yeah,
were on. And you're like, I remember seeing your name on this record that 12 people bought, you know, and they're like,
yes,
where did that come from?
exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's been a long time since I was in the dating game, but there's similarities. Like you can't come on too strong, like full on 1,000% nerd right off the bat. Like
That's
you
gonna be
have to
terrible.
read the room and like work up to it. You know, you have to be charming a little bit at first. You can't just totally geek out. But I've had these experiences. There's two that I've been thinking of where the liner notes came to life. One was up at the Edmonton Folk Festival. I was up there playing with Laurie McKenna, and a bunch of Boston people were up there. Rose Cousins and Zach Hickman were there, and I think some other people too. And we ended up in a bar with Joe Henry,
Yeah.
and Joe Henry produced that Solomon Burke record, which I think it's probably uh, no, I think it's in a car here. Um, he produced that Solomon Burke record that I love, and I remember going up to him and saying, "You need to come over. We're all huge fans of that Solomon Burke record. You need to tell us like one story that we can't get, from Google."
Yeah.
And like 3 hours later, he was still, and I don't know how many drinks later, he was still regaling us with stories, and the liner notes just came to life. Have you ever had that experience where, especially in your capacity at Club Passim, I'm sure there's people that have walked through the door and you're like, oh my God, you're that guy or you're that woman that was on this?
Oh, totally, totally. I mean, I remember, the first time that Larry Campbell came in playing with Richard
Ah,
Shindel's club, and I was just like, oh my God, that's Larry Campbell. It's like all the
ah,
records that he's been on, but also like seeing him at Newport with playing with Bob Dylan, and just like
yeah.
um or
That's the year they opened for me, right? At
yeah,
Newport?
yeah, right, right.
Right, because
That's
they played last on Saturday. I played first on Sunday.
right, right. So they were
Ergo,
before you. Yeah.
right. Yeah,
And
that's amazing.
when Michael Penn played at the club and he had Buddy Judge playing with him, and I was like, Buddy Judge, I know that name from this Grays album I have from the '90s, and there's always connections with people that come into the club, but then even when I get to meet people outside of it, I remember being at a Weepies show at probably over at the Wang or the Wilbur, and I was backstage hanging out with them, and they introduced me to their drummer for that tour, who was Pete Thomas. And I was just like, my jaw dropped. I'm
What?
like, you mean like from the Attractions, Pete Thomas? It's like, yeah, that's who that was. And
Wow.
it's just, it's like, do you know Pete? Like, not really. But I know who he is.
Right. And this
That's
stuff goes back before YouTube necessarily, like because there might have been a time when if you weren't like old enough to stay up to see like Elvis Costello playing a late night show, or and the videos might not have featured the band, you might not have ever seen Pete
totally,
Thomas.
totally.
You
You
know?
don't necessarily know what they look like, but then when you hear a name, and it's just, or the first time that when Rust Farm brought a drummer with them for a gig at Passim, and it was Dave Maddox, and it's
Yeah.
like, okay, Dave Maddox, who like was in Fairport Convention, but also played with Paul McCartney and all these other folks,
Yep. Yep.
and
Where is it? I'm looking for it. God, I do have these all alphabetized. Here it is. Yeah. Run Devil Run. He was on this
yep,
one on
yep,
several tracks. Um, yeah, that's got to be amazing to work in a venue where that kind of thing just happens all the time.
right,
Um, I was at a festival last fall. It was one that John Prine put together in the Dominican Republic of all places. It's that's a crazy sentence to say, all of that in a row. But I was backstage and they kept talking about his drummer Kenneth, and they didn't say Ken or Kenny. They just said Kenneth, and I was like, Kenneth, who, what drummer goes by Kenneth? That's an oddly specific name. And I was like, oh my God, this is Kenneth Blevins. Like
oh,
he was in John Hyatt's band. Where's my H's? Here we are. Yeah, he was in the Goners for Slow Turnin'.
oh wow,
And I was like, that's my record. Like that's the one. that I found John Hyatt through. So,
Hmm.
you know, that's the one that I really connected with. And so again, I waltzed right up to him and I was like, I'm assuming you're Kenneth Levins. And he's like, yeah. And I
Yeah.
went through the whole story of how I connected with that record. And he proceeded to tell me how the band was put together by Sonny Landreth, and how they, you know, they were they were the touring band for the Bring the Family record because they couldn't get all, you know, Ry Cooder and Nick Lowe and Jim Keltner together. And I just heard all these wonderful stories. And at the end of the night, we were at an after party, and he found me. He came and sought me out, and we sat down again. And he started up right where we left
That's
off. Just
great.
kept going with all these stories, and it
Yeah, yeah.
was like liner notes live, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I just can't get over it. I want to look at a couple There's a couple comments here that I want to address because I want to make sure that I'm being interactive with this thing because I've never done anything like this. I don't even know what it is. But we have the Mark Shark, hello, saying, with increased accessibility of recording, do you feel liner notes are more local? And that way, is music moving back to a pre-commercialization era, or are the national connections still the same? I think I get it. What they're talking about there. I mean, I do think in a way, I mean, music is all extremely local right now for the last couple months or so. I've been
Yeah.
on tour in my house. That's how local it is. Um, but you know, I think like a great example here in Boston, like Passim is the epicenter of a certain kind of music. I don't know if you want to call it folk, singer, songwriter, Americana, whatever you want to call it, roots music. It's an epicenter for that kind of music, and there's a huge scene here, kind of that's grown up around that. Um, I know that exists in other places. I don't. Sometimes when I go to those places, you may not know that stuff is there, but you might have heard a record from, say, someone, you know, an artist down in Nashville or something, and then you go and you visit Nashville and you realize, oh my God, that person up on stage is that person from the record, you know.
Hmm.
So in that way, it is local, but it's national too, especially for people that are traveling around, you know. Like, I don't know if that really gets at what they're talking about there,
Well,
but
I feel like, you know, there are certainly core scenes. Just like if you
yeah,
look at, you know, like at a pool of records that are artists based in the Boston area, you know, you very well may find that you know, John Sands is drumming on a lot of things, or Zach Hickman's playing bass on a lot of things, and Lyle Brewer or Duke Levine are playing guitar on a lot of things, and you
yeah,
know, because they are go-tos within a scene. But Nashville has that, New York has that, LA has that, and you know,
sure,
I think when you look at, you know, even records from the '70s that you think of as national records, you know, there was kind of a core band that was playing with, you know, James Taylor and Randy Newman and Jackson
yeah,
Browne and, you know, a lot of Eagles, and you know, and so there was this core group of people that were a scene,
absolutely,
and so that local aspect has been true the entire time.
yeah,
Or you know, or then, you know, you might find when you look at it in a more national or international way, you do find producers that are go-tos for people that, you know, whether it's Tucker Martine or Joe Henry or John Congleton, or, you know, like a lot of producers that you see their names around a lot these days. You know,
totally,
you start to see, like, okay, a lot of people are looking to this producer for a certain sound, and that
right.
producer might tend to work with a core group of musicians, but they might also work with, you know, whoever you've got as your core.
Absolutely, and that's a really good point. It reminds me of Joe Henry. He's got, you know, this stable of musicians that he picks from, and you know, one of which is Jay Belleros, who's from Old Orchard Beach, Maine. He used to live in Boston here, and so there are these regional scenes, and musicians move amongst them, and sometimes they'll have one sort of identity in this one scene, and then they'll go somewhere else. Like for Jay Belleros, he was a, you know, very respected and popular drummer here for when he was living here. He went to LA, got on a few great projects, and in with T-Bone Burnett and in with Joe Henry, and then just blew up, and now he's on every record coming
Right.
out of LA. So, you know, the scenes are both regional and national, and you can see that in the liner notes. You know, one of the, just kind of wrapping up here, because I could talk about this forever,
We can
and
go all day.
I know. I mean, the thing about that I think people may not understand or appreciate about liner notes is that in music, you know, where there is money to be made, it tends to be in the songwriting. The producers often get a lot of money. Um, Sometimes like the main artist gets a lot of money, not always, speaking
Yeah,
as
right.
a main artist. But the backing band and the accompanying musicians, those men and women, they're often paid like a daily rate.
Mhm.
And if they're, you know, A-list people, they might be making a really good living. But sometimes that day rate is not as high as you might think it would be, even for hit records. And sometimes the liner notes and those instrumental credits are, that's like almost part of the pay in a way,
Right.
and part of the compensation. Not
Absolutely.
that you do it for the exposure, but if you play on a record and you and it gets well known or people connect with it, so that person might be an artist themselves and they might call you up and want you to play on their record, and it may lead to more work in that way. So
Yeah.
to my mind, the liner notes are extremely important, and maybe in a digital era, more important than ever. And I don't know if I'll be throwing away my physical media anytime soon, because I still consult these all the time,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially for like song publishing stuff, you know,
Yeah.
because that stuff's not always on the internet, or it's not always right. Um, and do you find yourself consulting your liner notes on occasion?
All the time. I mean, because sometimes you might be listening to a record and you hear a song that sounds familiar, and and you find out like, well, this person wrote it, but then you might like, but I know it better because this person covered it, and I thought they
Yeah,
wrote it before, and so
yeah.
you really start to put together a whole picture of your own music collection.
Yeah, and like I started out saying, I don't know when you jumped in, but you can put the music on in the background, and it can be the soundtrack to your life, whatever you're doing, and that's a really powerful thing. But if you choose to kind of laser in on it and kind of
Yeah.
drill down on it a bit, it's just as, if not more, rewarding for all those extra layers of
and
information.
and for a lot of folks, the liner notes are part of the art of the whole package.
Yeah,
People put in a lot of time. There have been records over the years where someone writes those liner notes for you, and it might be there might be an essay of some kind, about you. Or when you look
yeah,
at Dylan's records like Highway 61 and Bring It All Back Home, where there's this kind of
yeah,
random thought dump on there, and it's fascinating to read that, and
yeah,
or old folkways albums that come with a whole book attached to them,
yeah.
and it gives it might give how to play the songs and some background of the historical context of traditional songs, and it's really I love digging in when I
Yeah.
get when I open a new record. I pull it all apart and look at everything, you
Yeah.
know before I even
At least
listen to it.
once.
Yeah,
Yeah, at
before
least
I even
once.
listen to it, I will scan through all of the liner notes and the credits, and just to give myself a little primer on what I'm about to experience.
Right. It's like going to a new place and looking at a map of it. You
Yeah,
know, while you're there, it's like, okay, this is where everything's laid out, and this is how I get around, and this is where everything is in relation to everything else. And yeah, I just find that, I find that to be so rewarding and just so enjoyable.
yeah.
Man, I could literally do this all day,
I
and
know.
I could
I
do
know.
this every week. I could
Someday,
do the
someday
same
you'll come
subject
over.
every week.
Someday you'll come over, and we'll just dig through the record collection here and find what connections there are. I did
I
see
love it.
someone did ask what my handle on Discogs was, and I actually think I have it linked here to my Instagram page. If you go to my Instagram,
Wow.
I think that the website that I have attached is my Discogs there. So people can look at my collection and judge, if you will.
I I love it. I love it. Matt, thanks so much for doing this. Thanks to everybody else for tuning in and for the comments and the waves. We're going to do it next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ology, some kind of ology. I don't actually know what ology we're going to do next week. Everything I do is rehearsed and really like carefully considered, except this. And it's so freeing. So we'll do it again.
Well, a pleasure to be on episode 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. All right. We'll see you soon.
All right.
Bye.